Somewhere in the grand tapestry of existence, between the birth of stars and the death of civilizations, cosmic irony had found its favorite hobby. Not the gentle sort that makes philosophers smile knowingly, but the kind that drives entire species to develop stress-molting patterns while contemplating the absurdity of their research grants. For exactly 107 years, 4 months and 16 days, the Galactic Research Consortium had been poking, prodding, and generally annoying what they dubbed the Apex, a cosmic anomaly that seemed to possess all the behavioral patterns of a particularly devoted golden retriever. If golden retrievers were made of exotic matter and violated 17 fundamental laws of physics on a Tuesday. The Apex defied classification with the stubborn persistence of a bureaucrat denying a perfectly valid permit application. It wasn't quite energy, it wasn't quite matter, and certainly wasn't interested in conforming to any respectable scientific framework. Measuring roughly 12 kilometers in diameter, when it felt like having a diameter, the thing rippled through space-time like a particularly moody aurora, shifting between dimensions with the casual indifference of someone changing television channels. What made the Apex particularly insufferable from a research standpoint was its complete and utter devotion to one unremarkable human woman. Not a queen, not a prophet, not even someone with an impressive social media following, just Hazel Cromwell, currently employed as a part-time janitor at the Meridian Station Museum of Geological Oddities, a establishment that attracted roughly 12 visitors per standard galactic year and specialized in displaying rocks that looked vaguely like famous politicians. The whole mess had started, as most galactic incidents do, with a routine cargo run gone sideways. Hazel had been piloting a freight hauler called the Stubborn Mule through the Kepler Junction, hauling a shipment of synthetic cheese substitutes to the Outer Rim colonies, a job that ranks somewhere between professional nose-pector and telemarketer on the galactic scale of career prestige. She'd been minding her own business, listening to some ancient Earth music that would have made sophisticated alien ears bleed, when the Apex had simply materialized alongside her ship like an uninvited wedding guest. The first research team to encounter the phenomenon had been a group of Zephyrian quantum physicists, whose crystalline brains processed information at speeds that made supercomputers look like arthritic tortoises. They'd detected the Apex following Hazel's cargo route, and had immediately assumed they'd discovered some new form of space-time predator. After 3 weeks of intense study, during which they deployed every scanning device short of a cosmic proctoscope, they'd concluded that the Apex was demonstrating unprecedented levels of non-hostile stalking behavior, which was scientific jargon for "this thing is following that human around like a lovesick teenager." The Centurion military intelligence had been next, convinced that Hazel must be some sort of secret weapon or covert operative. They'd subjected her to 17 different types of surveillance, 6 psychological evaluations, and one particularly awkward interrogation conducted entirely in interpretive dance. Their final report had been refreshingly honest. Subject appears to possess no special abilities, classified knowledge, or interesting personality traits. Recommend immediate declassification and a strong cup of coffee to forget this assignment ever happened. The Ethereal Consciousness Collective had approached the problem from a spiritual angle, believing the Apex to be some manifestation of cosmic karma or universal justice. They'd spent 2 years meditating in Hazel's general vicinity, achieving unprecedented levels of enlightenment, while learning absolutely nothing about the anomaly. Their final communique had been transmitted through interpretive light patterns that roughly translated to, "The universe is really, really weird, and we're going back to our home dimension now." Even the hive mind of Proxima Beta had taken a crack at it, assuming that their collective intelligence of 40 billion linked consciousness could surely solve what individual minds could not. They'd observed the Apex for 6 months, running probability calculations that would have made statisticians weep with joy, before concluding that the phenomenon was probably important, but definitely annoying, and returning to their usual activities of perfectly coordinated agriculture and synchronized napping. Through it all, Hazel had continued her unremarkable existence with the determined obliviousness of someone who'd learned to ignore the universe's more peculiar offerings. She'd finished her cargo runs, found a nice quiet job at the museum, and settled into a routine that involved cleaning display cases, watering 3 desperately optimistic plants, and occasionally explaining to visitors why the rock that looked like President Vex was not, in fact, cursed. But the Apex had followed her to every location, maintaining its vigil with the patience of a cosmic bureaucrat processing paperwork. It never interfered with station operations, never threatened anyone, and never did anything more interesting than occasionally shifting colors when Hazel walked past. The phenomenon had become such a fixture that the station's residents had started using it as a landmark, giving directions like, "Turn left at the interdimensional anomaly," and "Meet me by the thing that's following the janitor." Dr. Millicent Ashworth, the consortium's current lead researcher on the Apex project, had inherited the investigation from her predecessor, who'd retired to a quiet farming planet after developing what he'd described as acute cosmic frustration syndrome. She'd been studying the phenomenon for 12 years now, and had accumulated enough data to wallpaper a small moon, none of which explained why a cosmic entity with the apparent intelligence of a small deity had chosen to spend its existence shadowing a woman whose most exciting daily activity was alphabetizing cleaning supplies. The universe, it seemed, was having the last laugh after all. Emergency conferences in the galactic community typically involve matters of planetary extinction, interdimensional warfare, or the occasional temporal paradox that threatened to unravel causality itself. They did not, as a general rule, revolve around the cleaning schedule of a museum janitor. Yet here they were, representatives from 47 different species crammed into Conference Room C of Meridian Station, debating the cosmic significance of a woman who had recently discovered that the mineral display cases looked better when cleaned in alphabetical order. Dr. Millicent Ashworth stood at the front of the room, her presentation slides cycling through a century's worth of accumulated data with the grim efficiency of a funeral director, organizing a particularly complicated burial. Charts, graphs, and three-dimensional models filled the holographic display, each one representing another failed attempt to understand why the most mysterious phenomenon in recorded galactic history had chosen to orbit around someone whose biggest career achievement was keeping the Museum of Geological Oddities within acceptable dust accumulation parameters. "Ladies, gentlemen, and assorted consciousness configurations," she began, her voice carrying the particular exhaustion of someone who'd spent years explaining the inexplicable to people who really should have known better. "We are gathered here today to address what our colleagues have dubbed the Cromwell Conundrum, a designation that makes it sound like a particularly challenging crossword puzzle, rather than a cosmic mystery that has stumped our finest minds for over a century." The assembled delegates shifted in their various forms of seating: chairs, hovering platforms, and in one case, a small pond that bubbled thoughtfully when its occupant was considering complex theoretical frameworks. Professor Zineth, whose crystalline form refracted the room's lighting into prismatic patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't so irritating, chimed with the musical tones that passed for speech among the Zephyrians. Dr. Ashworth, the translation device, rendered their words with a sort of pompous authority that suggested advanced degrees in subjects that probably didn't need to exist. Surely after all this time we must have developed some working hypothesis about Miss Cromwell's significance. The Apex demonstrates clear signs of intelligence, purpose, and what our xenobiologists insist on calling cosmic attachment disorder. Captain Beaumont, who had the unenviable job of managing a space station that had accidentally become the epicenter of galactic scientific curiosity, leaned back in his chair with the expression of someone who'd learned to find humor in administrative nightmares. "Professor, with all due respect to your crystalline wisdom, we've had teams of experts studying Hazel for decades. The most significant thing we've discovered is that she prefers her morning coffee with exactly 2 sugars and no cream, and gets moderately annoyed when the supply shipments are late." Specialist Oren, whose reptilian features remained stoically unreadable despite what was clearly growing frustration, tapped his clawed fingers against the conference table. "Perhaps we're approaching this from the wrong angle entirely. The Apex isn't following Cromwell, it's protecting her, or hunting her in some incomprehensible cosmic fashion." "We've tested those theories extensively," Dr. Ashworth replied, advancing to the next slide with the sort of theatrical timing that suggested she'd given this presentation too many times. "The Apex shows no defensive behaviors when Hazel is in theoretical danger. We've staged 17 different emergency scenarios, from simulated station breaches to a carefully orchestrated food poisoning incident. The Apex remained completely passive throughout each test." Commander Hollis, who'd been tasked with coordinating the various emergency scenarios and had developed impressive skills in crisis acting, nodded grimly. "The food poisoning test was particularly elaborate. We had Dr. Pemberton fake severe digestive distress for 3 hours. The Apex didn't even shift color." "What about communication attempts?" asked Ambassador Wex, whose ethereal form flickered with patterns that indicated deep contemplation mixed with mild cosmic indigestion. Surely an entity of such obvious intelligence would respond to properly formatted diplomatic overtures. Dr. Ashworth's laugh held the bitter edge of someone who'd spent years talking to what was essentially a very large, very unresponsive cosmic pet. We've tried everything short of hiring an interdimensional interpreter. Mathematical sequences, prime number patterns, musical compositions, interpretive dance, though I still maintain that the Ethereal Consciousness Collective's 7-hour ballet was more torture than communication. The Apex responds to exactly none of it. Professor Bex, whose aquatic nature required him to attend conferences through a mobile water tank equipped with speakers, generated the series of clicks and bubbles that his species used to express profound skepticism. Have we considered that perhaps the entity is not following Cromwell at all, but rather coincidentally occupying the same general area of space-time for reasons entirely unrelated to her presence? The room fell silent, except for the gentle bubbling of Professor Bex's tank and the soft humming of the Apex itself, which was currently visible through the conference room's viewport, maintaining its eternal vigil roughly 3 kilometers off the station's port side. It had been displaying a particularly vibrant shade of purple today, though whether this indicated mood, digestive processes, or simply cosmic boredom was anyone's guess. We tested that hypothesis during year 43 of the study, Dr. Ashworth continued, her tone suggesting that year 43 had been particularly trying for everyone involved. We convinced Hazel to take a vacation to the Andromeda sector. The Apex followed her there, waited patiently outside her hotel for 2 weeks, and followed her back. It even seemed to enjoy the hyperspace journey, if cosmic entities can be said to enjoy anything. Chief Analyst Morse, who'd been quietly running probability calculations on her portable processing unit, looked up with the expression of someone who'd just discovered that mathematics had personally insulted her family. According to my analysis, the statistical probability of this being a coincidence is approximately 1 in 700 trillion. We're more likely to spontaneously evolve into sentient furniture than to encounter a random cosmic phenomenon that happens to share Hazel Cromwell's exact travel preferences. The conference room's environmental systems hummed with the gentle efficiency of technology that had long ago given up trying to make sense of the discussions it was required to support. Outside the viewport, the Apex continued its patient observation, occasionally shifting position in what might have been the cosmic equivalent of stretching, if cosmic entities had muscles that required regular maintenance. Which brings us to our current proposal, Dr. Ashworth announced, advancing to a slide that displayed what appeared to be a comprehensive psychological profile mixed with a hotel reservation system. Direct intervention. We're going to approach Miss Cromwell directly, explain the situation, and attempt to determine what makes her so cosmically irresistible. The assembled delegates exchanged glances, transmissions, and in one case a series of concerned bubbles that suggested this might be either the most brilliant, almost catastrophically stupid idea in the history of xenobiological research. Captain Beaumont cleared his throat. You do realize that Hazel has no idea any of this is happening, right? As far as she knows, she's just the janitor who happens to work at the station with the pretty space lights that everyone keeps staring at. Which, Dr. Ashworth replied with a smile that suggested she'd finally found a problem she could solve with traditional academic methodology, is exactly what makes this approach so promising. After a century of cosmic mystery, we're finally going to get some answers. The universe, somewhere in its vast cosmic consciousness, was undoubtedly preparing its next punchline. The interview room had been prepared with the sort of meticulous attention to detail typically reserved for first contact scenarios or peace negotiations between species who communicated primarily through violent interpretive dance. Dr. Ashworth had insisted on recording equipment that could capture everything from quantum fluctuations to emotional resonance patterns, while Captain Beaumont had quietly made sure the coffee machine was working and the chairs were comfortable enough for what promised to be either a groundbreaking scientific discovery or the most expensive therapy session in galactic history. Hazel Cromwell entered the room with the casual confidence of someone who'd been asked to discuss her work schedule and had absolutely no idea she was about to be subjected to what amounted to a cosmic inquisition. She carried a steaming mug of coffee, 2 sugars, no cream, and wore the expression of mild curiosity that suggested she was wondering if this was about the incident with the mineral display case that had somehow gotten rearranged into what looked suspiciously like a profane gesture in ancient Centaurian script. "Please, have a seat," Dr. Ashworth began, gesturing to the chair positioned directly across from an array of scanning devices that would have made a medical facility jealous. "We'd like to ask you a few questions about your unique situation." Hazel settled into the chair, took a sip of her coffee, and regarded the assembled team of xenobiologists, quantum physicists, and cosmic phenomenon specialists with the sort of polite attention usually reserved for insurance salespeople or relatives explaining their complicated relationship problems. "If this is about the cleaning supplies budget, I've already submitted the quarterly report, though I do think we could use better disinfectant for the crystalline formations exhibit." "Actually," Dr. Ashworth continued, consulting her notes with the careful precision of someone who'd rehearsed this conversation 17 different ways, "we'd like to discuss the cosmic entity that's been following you for the past century." Hazel blinked, looked out the viewport where the apex was currently displaying what appeared to be a particularly cheerful shade of turquoise, and then back at the assembled scientific minds. "Oh, that thing? I wondered what it was. I figured it was some sort of space weather phenomenon, like those aurora displays they show in the tourism brochures." The room fell silent except for the quiet humming of recording equipment and the distant sound of Professor Bex's tank bubbler, which had apparently malfunctioned from shock. Dr. Ashworth exchanged glances with her colleagues, each of whom was beginning to suspect that their century of research might have been approaching the problem from entirely the wrong angle. "Hazel," Dr. Ashworth said carefully, "that entity has been following you across 17 different star systems. It's violated numerous laws of physics just to maintain its proximity to your location. Surely you've noticed some correlation between its presence and your activities." "Well," Hazel said, stirring her coffee thoughtfully, "I did notice it tends to get brighter around lunchtime. I figured it was some sort of solar reaction, or maybe just the way the light hits it when the station rotates. Pretty, though. Makes the view from the janitor's closet much more interesting." Specialist Orin leaned forward, his reptilian features arranged in what might have been skepticism or possibly the beginning of a nervous breakdown. "Miss Cromwell, are you telling us that you've been completely unaware that you're being followed by what might be the most powerful cosmic entity in known space?" Hazel shrugged, with the casual indifference of someone who'd learned to roll with the universe's more peculiar offerings. "I work at a museum that displays rocks shaped like politicians. My threshold for weird is pretty high. Plus, it's not like the thing's been bothering anyone. Seems harmless enough." The next 3 hours proceeded with the sort of methodical thoroughness that made root canal procedures look like entertainment. Dr. Ashworth and her team subjected Hazel to every conceivable test short of ceremonial sacrifice, convinced that somewhere in her perfectly ordinary biology lay the key to understanding cosmic mysteries that had baffled civilizations for generations. The genetic analysis revealed that Hazel possessed the standard human complement of chromosomes, with the only notable variation being a slightly elevated resistance to lactose that would have been considered unremarkable in any other context. The brain scans showed normal neural activity, though Dr. Pemberton noted that she seemed to have an unusual ability to remain calm under stress, which he attributed to years of dealing with museum visitors who insisted on touching exhibits marked "Do Not Touch" in 17 different languages. The psychological evaluation proved even more anticlimactic. Hazel answered questions about her childhood, her career aspirations, and her feelings about cosmic responsibility with a sort of straightforward honesty that suggested she'd never encountered a situation that required anything more complex than basic common sense. Her most traumatic life experience appeared to be the time she'd accidentally scheduled 2 different cleaning shifts for the same day and had to explain to her supervisor why the mineral displays were suspiciously dust-free. "Perhaps," suggested Commander Hollis, who'd been observing the proceedings with growing amusement, "we should try a more spiritual approach. Maybe Miss Cromwell has some sort of unconscious connection to cosmic forces that she's not aware of." This suggestion led to the recruitment of Ambassador Wex, whose ethereal nature supposedly made her sensitive to psychic emanations and cosmic harmonics. The resulting meditation session lasted 2 hours and concluded with Ambassador Wex announcing that Hazel's aura was pleasantly beige and showed no signs of cosmic significance beyond a mild predisposition toward organized storage solutions. The alien mystics were even less helpful. A team of Zephyrian consciousness readers spent an entire day attempting to detect hidden depths in Hazel's psyche, only to conclude that her most profound thoughts seemed to revolve around whether the geological specimens would look better arranged by color or by planetary origin. A group of ethereal dreamwalkers tried to explore her subconscious for cosmic connections and found mostly grocery lists and a recurring anxiety about running out of cleaning supplies. Maybe we're overcomplicating this, Chief Analyst Moore suggested during what had become an increasingly desperate brainstorming session. Perhaps the Apex isn't attracted to something special about Miss Cromwell. Maybe it's repelled by something normal about everyone else. This theory led to another round of tests, this time comparing Hazel's biological and psychological profiles to those of other humans who'd encountered the Apex without becoming its focus of attention. The results were comprehensively unhelpful. Hazel fell within normal ranges for every measurable human characteristic, from blood pressure to philosophical outlook on life. "I hate to interrupt," Hazel said during a brief break in the proceedings, "but I really should get back to work. The mineral displays don't clean themselves, and I've got a shipment of new specimens coming in tomorrow that need to be catalogued and arranged before the weekend." Dr. Ashworth looked at her notes, then at the assembled team of experts, then at the Apex, which was currently performing what appeared to be a gentle cosmic ballet outside the viewport. "Miss Cromwell, do you have any theories about why this entity might be interested in you specifically?" Hazel considered this for a moment, taking another sip of her coffee. "Well, I do take my vitamins pretty regularly, and I've been using the same brand of digestive supplements for about 15 years now. They're really good for lactose intolerance. Maybe cosmic entities appreciate good digestive health." She said it with the sort of casual confidence that suggested she was making a joke, completely unaware that she had just provided the first potentially useful clue in over a century of intensive scientific investigation. The room went very, very quiet. Outside the viewport, the Apex seemed to pulse with what might have been excitement, though whether this was related to Hazel's revelation or simply cosmic indigestion was, as always, anyone's guess. The silence that followed Hazel's casual mention of digestive supplements stretched across the conference room like a cosmic held breath, broken only by the gentle bubbling of Professor Bex's tank and the soft humming of the Apex, which had suddenly begun displaying colors that could only be described as aggressively interested. Dr. Ashworth stared at her notes with the expression of someone who's just realized that the answer to the universe's greatest mystery might be found in the dietary supplement aisle of a space station pharmacy. "Miss Cromwell," she said carefully, her voice carrying the sort of controlled excitement that suggested she was either on the verge of a breakthrough or a complete psychological collapse. "Could you tell us more about these digestive supplements? The brand, the ingredients, perhaps when you started taking them?" Hazel, completely oblivious to the cosmic significance of her afternoon snack routine, shrugged with the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather. "Oh, they're called Digestes Pro. I've been taking them for about 15 years now, ever since that cargo run to the Tau Ceti colonies, where I made the mistake of trying authentic Centaurian cheese. 2 tablets with lunch, every day, regular as clockwork. They're made with some sort of mineral extract from the Kepler system. Really helps with the lactose thing." The assembled scientists exchanged glances that could have powered a small fusion reactor. Chief Analyst Morse was already running calculations on her portable processing unit, her fingers moving with the desperate efficiency of someone who'd just spotted the light at the end of a very long, very expensive tunnel. "Kepler system minerals," Dr. Ashworth repeated, consulting her database with the sort of frantic energy typically reserved for bomb disposal or last-minute tax preparation. Specifically, the rare earth compounds found in the asteroid belt around Kepler 442. Those deposits contain naturally occurring quantum crystalline formations that create... Oh, for the love of all that's scientific. Outside the viewport, the Apex had begun what could only be described as cosmic jumping jacks, its form shifting between dimensions with the excited energy of a space dog that had just heard the word walk. The phenomenon was simultaneously beautiful and deeply embarrassing for every scientist who'd spent the last century trying to unlock its mysteries. "According to my analysis," Chief Analyst Moores announced, her voice carrying the sort of grim satisfaction that came with solving a puzzle that had been driving her species collectively insane, "the quantum crystalline compounds in those supplements create a resonance frequency that matches the dimensional signature of the Apex's apparent home dimension. It's not following Miss Cromwell at all. It's responding to what amounts to an interdimensional dinner bell." Specialist Torrin leaned back in his chair, his reptilian features arranged in what might have been cosmic resignation mixed with professional embarrassment. You're telling me that the most mysterious phenomenon in galactic history has been chasing lactose intolerance medication for over a century. Not chasing, Dr. Ashworth corrected, her scientific precision intact despite the crushing weight of cosmic irony. Responding. The apex appears to be a sentient energy pattern from a parallel dimension, where those particular quantum frequencies are, well, we can only assume, they're either nutritionally significant or pleasantly nostalgic. To test this theory, they convinced Hazel to take her usual afternoon dose of Digestes Pro, while the assembled scientific minds watched with the sort of intense attention usually reserved for the birth of stars or the death of civilizations. The results were immediately obvious and profoundly anticlimactic. The moment Hazel swallowed her tablets, the apex brightened considerably, its form stabilizing into what appeared to be a state of cosmic contentment. It's like feeding a pet, Conda Hollis observed, her voice carrying the sort of wonder that came with witnessing the universe's most elaborate practical joke. Ah, a very large, very powerful, interdimensional pet that's been following its favorite human around because she smells like home. The verification experiments that followed were both conclusive and deeply humiliating for everyone involved. When Hazel was 15 minutes late taking her supplements, the apex began displaying what could only be described as cosmic sulking, its colors shifting to disappointed purples and melancholy blues. When she took an extra dose, the phenomenon practically vibrated with joy, performing aerial maneuvers that would have been impressive if they weren't so embarrassing. Professor Sinnett, whose crystalline form had been flickering with what passed for mortification among the Zephians, finally spoke up. So we've spent over a century, allocated resources that could have funded the exploration of 17 different star systems, and assembled the finest scientific minds in the galaxy to discover that we've been studying the cosmic equivalent of a homesick pet following someone who smells like its favorite food. In essence, yes, Dr. Ashworth replied, her voice carrying the sort of professional dignity that suggested she was already planning her resignation letter. Though I prefer to think of it as the universe's way of reminding us that sometimes the most profound mysteries have the most mundane explanations. The fallout from this revelation rippled through the galactic scientific community with the sort of devastating efficiency usually associated with supernovas or particularly aggressive bureaucratic audits. Research grants were quietly redirected to more promising projects. Academic papers were hastily withdrawn from publication, and several prominent xenobiologists took extended vacations to planets where interdimensional phenomena were considered either mythical or grounds for involuntary psychiatric evaluation. The apex, meanwhile, continued its eternal vigil over Hazel's lunch routine, with the patient devotion of a cosmic entity that had finally found its purpose in the universe. It had become such a fixture that the station's navigation systems now included it as a permanent landmark, and the tourism department had begun advertising authentic cosmic phenomena viewing as part of their standard station tour package. Dr. Ashworth found herself reassigned to a project studying the mating habits of vacuum-adapted space algae, a career move that was either a profound demotion or a blessed relief, depending on one's perspective on cosmic irony. She occasionally found herself wondering if the universe had a sense of humor, then remembered that she'd just spent 12 years of her life studying proof that it absolutely did. Hazel, for her part, continued her janitorial duties with the sort of determined obliviousness that had made her the unwitting center of galactic attention in the first place. She'd been told that her digestive supplements were somehow connected to the pretty space lights outside her window, though she'd never quite understood the details and had been too polite to ask for clarification. The universe, having delivered its punchline with the sort of timing that would have made professional comedians weep with envy, settled back into its usual routine of creating stars, destroying planets, and occasionally reminding its inhabitants that sometimes the most extraordinary mysteries had the most perfectly ordinary explanations. The aftermath proved even more entertaining than the discovery itself. Within weeks, Digestes Pro had become the most studied pharmaceutical product in galactic history, with researchers desperately attempting to understand how a simple lactose intolerance remedy had accidentally created the universe's most expensive pet food. The manufacturer, a small pharmaceutical company that had previously specialized in unremarkable digestive aids, suddenly found themselves fielding requests from xenobiologists wanting to purchase industrial quantities of their product for cosmic entity nutrition research. Captain Beaumont had quietly begun charging admission for what the station now advertised as Apex Feeding Time, turning Hazel's lunch break into the galaxy's most unlikely tourist attraction. Visitors would gather at the observation decks precisely at noon, watching with hushed reverence as a woman in a maintenance uniform consumed 2 small tablets and caused an interdimensional phenomenon to perform what appeared to be a cosmic dance of gratitude. Hazel herself had adapted to her newfound fame with a sort of practical resignation that suggested she'd learned to accept that the universe occasionally required her participation in events she didn't entirely understand. She'd asked for a small raise to compensate for her inadvertent role as cosmic entertainment, received it without argument, and continued to treat the Apex with the same polite indifference she showed to all the other inexplicable aspects of working in space. She had, however, begun bringing an extra thermos of coffee to work, reasoning that if she was going to be galactically significant, she might as well be properly caffeinated for it. And somewhere in the cosmic vastness, the Apex continued its faithful watch over the most important meal schedule in the galaxy, content in the knowledge that some bonds transcend dimensions, species, and the basic laws of physics, even if those bonds happen to involve lactose intolerance and a really good mineral supplement.